Tonight's going to be, I think, really, really impactful. It already has been for me. In this series that we started a couple of weeks ago, we've called it Us Versus Us. I don't know if you've noticed this in America. If you're on social media, you've definitely noticed it. Probably the best way to vent about life and not get any better is through social media. And so many people just throw their opinions out. And America is more divisive today than maybe it has ever been. I heard a statistic recently that the number of counties that won in a landslide, or at least voted in a landslide, was higher than it's ever been in the history of the United States of America. Meaning, we're not only believing different things, but we're also separating ourselves from each other and finding our kind and hanging with our people and not with other people. And I think this series is incredibly important, not just for our nation, but for our community, because we believe that God is not a God of labels. All of us have labels and we all carry labels. I am a son, I am a husband, I am an employee, I am a person. Those are all labels, but we believe that labels don't have to be so divisive. And so we're talking about some of the things that are naturally divisive. When you hear, oh, that person is a fill in the blank, Democrat, Republican, African American, Asian, white person, that person is someone from a different nation, or they're of a different age, or they have a different sexuality, or different gender, whatever it may be. It's so easy for it to divide us. And what we're realizing in this series is that when you get to know people, when you really dig in with questions and curiosity, you find out that it's not really us versus them, it's really us versus us, that we have more in common with each other than divide us. And so that's really what the series is about. Tonight, I'm really excited about, particularly because it's something that I've grown up with my whole life and have just recently really begun to learn about what it means for us to experience racial healing. And tonight, I've got a couple of friends that I'm gonna interview and let them tell a little bit of their story, but then also let them tell us what they think we could do as a community to experience racial healing. And I think it's gonna be really, really, hopefully it'll be very interesting, but I think it'll be really, really helpful. But before we get into that, I wanted to play you a clip from Blackish. Anybody watch the sitcom, the show Blackish? Thank you, Latricia. You got real excited about that. I'll keep it 100 if we're still doing that in 2017. My only experience with Blackish is on airplanes. I've seen a number of episodes of Blackish. I don't know why, but whenever I get on a plane, Delta has it for free, and I just end up watching a bunch of Blackish shows, and it's fantastic. Very, very funny. But there's a great clip that I wanted to show you, and the clip is thick with politics. But I want you to move past the politics. If any of it bothers you, go back and watch what Adam Boyle said about politics that was last week, I guess, because I thought what he said was just fantastic. So move past the politics, and I want you to just listen to what he's saying, but also listen to the emotion through which he's saying it. Check this out. Oh, and then after that, I'll invite Cameron and Crystal up here. Check this out. Welcome Crystal and Cameron up here. Thank y'all for being here.
We're glad to be here.
These are two amazing people. They're not married to each other. Crystal is married to Marquise, who works here and has got a ragweed allergy that he's trying to control right now. So, did you not want me to share that? Sorry about that, Marquise. Cameron, as we watched that clip the other day, we watched it together in my office, and it was as quiet in there as it was in here after we played it. And my question to you then is the same question now. Is that the way most black people feel? Is that the way you have felt in your life? Can you relate to his emotions?
Yeah, it's interesting. That song originally is by Billie Holiday, and it was remade by Nina Simone, and it's called Strange Fruit. The song is about lynching in the history of America. And if you know anything about the history of America, the middle slave trade started about 1619. Then you get some developments like 1787, you get the 3/5 compromise, where basically the South said we needed some more votes, so we're gonna give 3/5 of a worth and value to the African American. Then you get, in 1865, you get the emancipation, slavery is over. But then you get Reconstruction. And you get to 1896, and you get the Plessy versus Ferguson, separate but equal. And then there are Jim Crow laws that are established from 1865 to 1965. So in the history of this country, there has always been intentional damage done to the African American people. So absolutely, most African Americans completely agree with this sentiment.
Crystal, you did not grow up in the South, but
No.
Unfortunately, racial tension has not just happened in the South. I think a lot of times we think, oh, well, it's just in the Deep South, where for the longest time slavery existed, where people fought to keep slavery from being abolished, and then where so much of the civil rights movement really happened. But a lot of your experience has been in California, which is where you're from, West Coast,
Yes.
I assume is the best coast.
Yes. I still think that.
So tell us about your childhood. Where did you experience this most? I know recently at a place of employment you experienced a form of racism.
Yes. Well, I grew up in a single-parent home in South Central LA. With my mom had 5 kids, 2 older brothers and 2 younger siblings. I happened to be the middle child. And so I experienced a lot of racism, whether it was towards me or to my siblings. But the most previous one that I've experienced was in a workplace at a church that I worked for. And it was set up as like a Google setting. We sat with our teams, and it was 3 out of the 5 black people that worked on staff on the same team. And I happened to be one of them. And the moment we all formulated, sat with our team in our group, we got a lot of stares, we got a lot of comments being made, but the one comment that stuck with me and just made me think like, man, there's no way to really like escape. A comment was made from a director or one of the pastors on staff, and he goes and he leans into us and he goes, y'all need to diversify this table. I looked around and I said, now there is about 30 other tables filled with predominantly white people, and you came to the black table and said we need to diversify it. Literally my heart sunk to my feet. I looked at like the disgrace on my coworker's face, and I instantly said, I'm no longer working here. So that was my most recent experience with racism, and it just felt like you didn't judge me based off of what I can do in my job, my intellect, the gifts that God has given me. You judged me based off the color of my skin. And so it really put a damper on my spirit. Yeah.
What I love about the story, though, is that there was a white coworker who actually saw what had happened, heard what had happened, and said, hey, that's not right.
Yes.
And really, tonight, one of the themes of tonight is going to be the responsibility that we carry, all of us carry, to help anyone who is experiencing injustice. So what did that do, the friend of yours, the coworker who spoke up on your behalf?
I was shocked, to be quite honest, because I never really experienced. I grew up in California, so it's pretty diverse. I mean, my next door neighbors, I had Asian next door neighbors, white, Hispanics, blacks. And so to have someone that was white hear what took place, and he said, absolutely not. We worked so hard to bridge the gap, to be unified, and to work towards diversity. We cannot have comments being said or mentioned and a lack of awareness, with a lack of awareness. And so he said, well, what are y'all gonna do about it? And we looked at each other, all the black people, and we were like, nothing. We're not gonna be the black people to go into HR doing the woe is me. We feel like, comments are being made that makes us uncomfortable. We just didn't want to be those type of people. So he said, well, I'm gonna go tell them. And so we literally sat at the table with our heads down and like, what is about to happen? So all these cans of worms opened up actually, and we entered into conversations. We started to have conversations about what we feel, just as a community, and even working on staff, being black and not feeling worthy to be in that space or in that place, just simply because of the color of our skin. And so I was really, I was happy that he did make, an effort to stand up, because that's what it looks like to stand up for those who are unrightfully, mistreated. So he did that, and I really appreciated him for that in that time and in that moment.
That's awesome. I was inspired hearing about it, honestly. Cameron, can you help us understand why should most people here, I would imagine, MP Nights is a great environment for anyone who believes anything, but I believe that God created the world and he sent his son Jesus to give us life. And because of that, I think there's a responsibility that anyone who calls themselves a follower of Jesus has to speak up, to speak out, to be a friend, to stand in the gap, to be a voice for those who have no voice. Why is that such a responsibility in your mind for those who are Christ followers?
Well, one, that's what God did. You can look at all of Scripture, Old Testament or New Testament. There are plenty of racial stories throughout the Bible. You can look in Galatians 2 when Paul had to call out Peter when he left sitting with the Gentiles to go and sit with the Jews. So there's plenty of stories for us to pull from. But for here, us in the American context, there has been almost irreparable damage done to the African-American soul here in this country. 400 years of slavery, of systemic injustice, individual oppression, financial, education, and every level people have been taken advantage of. In this country, it is the white person, particularly the white male, who holds the power, economically, politically, in every way. And so, since most of this church is made up of a majority culture of white American Christians, the responsibility falls on you in many ways because you have to use your voice. Because this is what God has called us to do. I mean, Jesus talked about the oppressed and those who are poor, those who are heartbroken, those who are marginalized more than anything else in the rest of Scripture. And so we are not fulfilling our responsibility in this area. We're not only doing a disservice to each other, we're doing a disservice to the gospel.
So how has it been personal for you? I know you've seen it in many ways, and a lot of people would look at you and go, Cameron, you look great, you're dressed well, it seems like you're doing great in life, but you've had experiences in your past, I know just from getting to know you. Can you share one of them just to let us in on
Absolutely.
what it feels like? What does it mean to have black skin?
Y'all ready?
Y'all ready for this?
So check this out. I was 12 years old at middle school, Hill Middle School. I was in gym class. And so we had a game that was coming up that week. And so when you're in middle school, you wear your jerseys and stuff to school. So I had my number 9 on, fresh, ready to go. I got called to the principal's office. And know me, I was a good kid. I never really got in trouble too much. So I ran to the principal's office. I figured it was something good.
He's going to give me an award.
Exactly. So I pulled up into the principal's office, and I see 8 other black kids lined up on a wall, all 5'10" to 6 feet tall. I see 2 girls, the principal, the parents of the girls, the security officer. These 2 girls claim that a black kid assaulted them and robbed them. And so what our school did is they pulled out every single African-American child that fit that description of 5'10" to 6 feet tall, and they placed us on a wall in a middle school. And they asked the 2 girls which one of us did it. So here I am. I've never seen these girls before. They start going up and down the line. And eventually their hand stops on me. So because I fit the description of a 5'10" to 6 foot, 12 to 13-year-old, they lined us up on a wall. And immediately they said that you're looking at 2 years in juvenile detention for fitting the description. Now the sad part about it is they found out the girls later were lying. They made a story up because they lost their stuff, but they figured the easiest way for us to get out of trouble is to blame it on a black kid. So you imagine when you were 12 years old, what were you like? What was going through your mind? What were the experiences that you were having? Then you imagine being a 12-year-old placed on a wall because of your skin color in a middle school, in a place you're supposed to be protected. And your own school is criminalizing you at 12 years old. In that moment, any ounce of innocence that I had left in my life was gone. You see, my mother told me that things like this might happen. I had been called an N-word before, but I had never been in a position until that point where I could lose my life for fitting the description.
I am so sorry. I mean, hearing that story, I just hate both of your stories. I mean, I don't want to say I'm glad that what happened to you, Crystal, but it did cause you and your husband to move back to Georgia, which I think is fantastic. So I am excited about that. But Cameron, the hard part is it's hard to imagine that happening to a white person because that more rarely does. When we were talking, one of the things that was very enlightening to me and really exposed the way I think as a white male is I remember growing up when affirmative action began to become legislated. And I remember overhearing white people, my parents, other adults who were saying, why do we need affirmative action? Everyone has the same opportunity. So how do you feel? Do you feel like everyone has the same opportunity in America?
No. So right now, if you were to go to Forbes.com, and you can actually look up the wealth statistic. You know, wealth is income and asset minus debt. And so a house, unless you own it, is a liability. So that's not an asset, it's a liability. And so right now, if you look up Forbes.com, they will show you that the average white household has a wealth status of $122,000 in the United States of America, the average white household. The average black household, on the other hand, $1,100 of wealth. So there is literally a $121,000 difference in the median household wealth of white and black households. And the shame is that figure has increased by 200% since the civil rights era ended. So if there inequality in this country, is there equal opportunity in this country? Just based on statistic alone, absolutely not.
What about crime? Because some people would say, well, a lot of black males are the ones committing the crime. But what's your thought on that? I know you would say, no, it's a little different than that. How do you see that?
Yeah, it's interesting.
I'm just setting you up, Cameron.
Yeah, I hear you. I'm knocking out for you. You know, it's funny. You hear a lot of people say, black on black crime. Why are you kneeling? Go worry about your own communities. And it's interesting because 89% of African Americans are killed by other African Americans. That you do know. But the stat you never hear is that 83% of white Americans who are killed by other white Americans. You see, what we have is a density issue. You're going to attract and you're going to do violence to those who are actually around you. But imagine this. Imagine you did live in Chicago. Imagine that these real economic realities were hitting your life. You are a single mother, a single parent with 3, 4, or 5 children in the household. Your dad is off to jail because of the war on drugs. That's a whole nother story. There's 10,000 people living in a mile radius of each other with no educational or job opportunities that are worth actually pursuing. You don't think that there will be any violence done? You think with all these historical things that have happened here in this country that there wouldn't be any violence that would be happening between a marginalized people? You see, the things that we are seeing now are merely symptoms of a greater issue. You see, racism and inequality in this country is just as real. It's just as a part of American tradition as Christianity is. And the two have always been inseparable in this country. So what we are seeing right now in regards to black on black crime, inner city crime, it's just merely a symptom of a greater issue.
Cameron, one of the things I love about you is that, and Crystal and I were talking about this, but I said, Crystal, how does he make you feel all that he knows? And you said I don't know.
He makes me question my blackness.
That's what you said, which I thought was very funny, but I really do admire it in you. I admire how well-informed you are. And then I asked you the other day because after I said to you, well, come on, Cameron, doesn't everyone have the same opportunity? Because the way I was raised to think about these kinds of issues, I can overhear people saying, well, Cameron can go to college. In fact, it's probably easier for him to get a scholarship than for most people, which is not true. And you just rattled off 11 reasons why that's not true. And honestly, I tipped my hat to you at how much you knew. And then it also embarrassed me at how ignorant my statement was. And then I was also so impressed with how calm you stayed in answering it because it was a very offensive statement that I said that you did not respond in defense. You just calmly stated the truth. So I asked you the other day as well, but how do you stay so calm? How are you so well informed, and how do you stay so calm in talking about these issues?
You know, one thing about being black is you get a lot of practice. You know, as an African American, you live in two worlds. W.E. Du Bois said that there's a two nature folk for African Americans. There's one where we live amongst our culture, where we're amongst each other, you know, saying what's up, how you doing, you know, playing whatever game you play. I like to play, you know, some dice and stuff myself a little bit. Or y'all play dominoes at all? You ever play dominoes, bones, anything like that? Okay, never mind. All right, I'm skipping. I'm moving on.
We play spades.
Yeah,
Cameron.
spades. Okay, spades. That's fine. All right,
Hearts.
dominoes. Yeah, that's fine. But then you also have another reality where you actually go into the majority culture. Now, something you have to learn as an African American, my mama told me a long time ago that you need to have your game face on when you leave this house. Because what's going to happen is people are not going to accept you or love you as who you are. So you got to know how to operate. And so something Crystal can definitely share with you is that as an African American, the reason that many of us in these conversations are able to remain so calm is because the emotions, the feelings, and the things that we've been thinking and talking about have been happening in our circle since we were children. But for many white people, this is the very first time they've ever heard any of these things. And so a lot of times when people talk about race, they assume that most people are at a high school level, when in fact you might be in elementary, if not preschool. Because there's a whole miseducation that's happened in our culture, in the public school system, but also just in life. You know, one of the things that I hear from white people often is, I don't really have a culture.
I'm colorblind. I don't see color.
Yeah, like I don't have a culture. I don't have any preference. I'm just myself. Well, the problem with that is that by being the majority culture, you get to determine the tempo and temperature of the country.
I'll throw in one example, and then I'll kick it to you, Crystal. But I said to Adam Boyle one time, who's from Ireland, I said, Adam, you have quite the accent. And he said, so do you. He didn't say it that way. But that's another example of that. When you only live in the South and you talk the way other people talk, you don't have an accent to the people you're around. Anyone who talks different than you has an accent, and you're asking them to acclimate to your culture as opposed to you having to understand or acclimate to theirs, which is what the majority feels, I think. Or unfortunately, it just happens and we don't always feel it. So Crystal, what about you? How have you experienced having to adapt to another culture, to the majority culture?
Are y'all ready for this? So, I mean, growing up, just like Cameron was saying, you know, these are things we've been taught since we were young, a child. But I remember marrying my husband over there, Marquise, and he just got a job at a predominantly white church, and I remember him telling me vividly, hey, Crystal, when you go into any of these meetings, when you go into any of these rooms, you're going to probably be the only black woman. I need you to smile. Make sure you're smiling, because I don't want them to think that anything's wrong with you or that you're on some sort of defense by just your regular face. Is this bad? Is this a bad face? I don't know. But anyways, he told me that, and I absolutely got offended. Because I was like, my black husband telling me that when I walk into these rooms, I need to smile and be extra, like, cheerful. It just made me feel some type of way that he had to cue me on that. So I think, yes, definitely hearing things that my mom taught me, but then getting married, and now my husband telling me something about, you know, a predominantly white culture, how I should present myself, when I believe it's natural for me to have my resting face, and that should be okay. And then when it's time to smile, and that's okay. But he said, no, the moment I open the doors, I need to be, hey, everyone. Hi, I'm Crystal. Nice to meet you. How are you? So that really took things back for me, and just realized, like, wow, this is something that I will be living with for pretty much the rest of my life. And also, I just think about our future kids. These are things that I'll have to, you know, talk to them about, and that's frightening to me, that I will have to sit a 3-year-old, 4-year-old, 5-year-old, 7-year-old and tell them, hey, you know, you may be treated a little bit differently because your hair is a little bit more curly, or because your skin is a little bit more darker. people may say unkind things to you, but this is how you should act in response to that. I think that's very frightening for me. Not a mother yet, but just thinking about just where I live in Alpharetta. My kids probably will go to school somewhere in Alpharetta, and they'll probably be the only black child in that school. That is very, very, very frightening to me. So that's what I've experienced.
Because my sense is it fair to say it feels like you're starting at a deficit?
Absolutely, with targets, yeah.
So when I asked you about this, Crystal, you talked about a video that I want to show right now. But is there anything you want to say to set it up?
No, I saw this video on Facebook, and it literally just kind of brought me to tears. It just kind of showed how all of us, it was by not by chance or happenstance that we got the parents that we got, we were in the communities that we were in, but it was nothing the students did, nothing, they didn't get to choose. They didn't get to choose the parents. They didn't just get to choose the community that they were in. It was given to them. And how no matter where they lie on the spectrum, that everyone still has a chance at the race. And so, yes, this clip, it really brought me to tears. I hope it doesn't bring me to tears right now, but I hope that y'all enjoy it, and I hope that y'all take something from it. So
you can roll it. I'm glad you showed me that, and I love being able to show it here because I do think it paints such a vivid picture. Everyone has opportunity, but everyone doesn't have the same opportunity. Everyone doesn't have equal opportunity. I love that verse that they threw up at the end. 1 John said, let's not love in word or in talk, but let's love in deed. Let's love with our actions. And so that's what we're gonna do the remaining minutes that we have, is talk about, well, how can we love with our actions? What can we actually do? Because we can't just remain silent. I believe it is part of our calling, it's part of our responsibility to act, to speak out, to try to help. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna put a phone number up on the screen, and after we talk for just a bit, I wanna open it up to a Q&A, to questions. And so if you have a question that you wanna ask Cameron, that you wanna ask Crystal, I'd love for you to text it in, and we've got a team monitoring the hotline, and they're gonna filter through, and they're gonna pick out some questions that we're gonna answer right here. So is that phone number able to put it up there? Are we able to? There it is. Wham! 678-585-6085. So take that down. Ask any questions you want. Let me just tell you, first of all, my response to that video is I feel guilty. Why is that not a helpful response, Cameron, for anyone here to go, well, that just makes me feel bad. I don't like feeling that way, so I don't want to think about it. It makes me feel too guilty, so I don't like thinking about that.
Yeah, so guilt is an interesting thing. When we're talking about it, the phrase that's often used when talking about something like this is white guilt. Is that because all this racism has happened corporately and systemically in this country, even if I individually have not participated, somehow I am still complicit in what is going on. So that sense of guilt comes over you. Well, that's very human to feel that. But the reason that it's not necessarily beneficial to what's actually going on and moving forward and progressing in this issue, because if you feel guilty, it often causes you to stop and to run away from something. Mm-hmm. And so if you feel so guilty to the point where it causes you to freeze, have no empathy, partake in no conversation, and to do nothing, then it's not helpful. It's actually more destructive to remain in that guilt. So guilt is a very human thing. And you know what? We should feel that at some level. Because if I offend my brother, I'm going to feel guilt. Even if I unintentionally do something to offend you, there's a guilt that's going to be there. That's a human response. God gave you that. But how do you deal and manage that guilt? That is the key.
And your white coworker, back to your story on the other side of America, he could have felt guilty and probably did feel guilty, and he could have caused it to create paralysis in him, but it didn't. His guilt seemed to create a responsibility in him. And that is what I'm trying to do, just to be straight up honest. I'm trying to not let my guilt keep me paralyzed, but I'm trying to, instead of feeling guilty, I want to feel responsible. That if I've taken a bunch of steps forward, not because of anything I've done, but because of the family I was born into and the opportunities that I've been given, I want those to cause me to be responsible to try to help people who haven't had the same advantages. And so that's what it seems like that friend did for you, is he felt, you know what, I want to be responsible for this injustice that I see, and I'm going to go speak up on behalf of my friend, which I think is fantastic.
Absolutely, because I believe in our world, injustice anywhere is injustice everywhere. Just because it didn't happen to him didn't mean that his heart didn't break for it. And that's what I saw on his face, was shame, guilt. He was crying, literally leaving the seat.
Tears.
With tears. He had tears. We were kind of shocked, but not so shocked. But he was in tears, and what I saw was that his heart broke for what was happening to his sister and brothers in Christ, and he was not having that. And so he did what he needed to do. And like I said, that was the very first time I had an encounter with someone of the other ethnicity who stood up for me as a black woman, and also who stood up for the two black men and said, hey, I'm gonna do something about this. Yes, they can go into HR, and yes, they can plead their case, but if I say something, that's when it's gonna matter. And so for him to recognize that and be aware of that was phenomenal to me. And so, yeah.
So Cameron, you are a pastor at Eagle's Nest Church, which is pastored by Pastor Lee Jenkins, who is a fantastic man and has become a good friend to me. And he's come up with 5 things that any one of us can do to take action so that we don't just love in word or in talk, but we actually love in deed. So I've asked Cameron just to walk through these 5 things. Anything you want to say to set them up, or do you just want to walk right through them? All right, well, let's put the first one up there. Here's the first one. Listen to us. What does that mean, Cameron?
Yeah, this is the interesting one because this is actually the hardest one. So say somebody came up to you and said that my son or my daughter, they have cancer. My daughter has breast cancer. And they begin to share with you the story and what's happening. They begin to share the pain that it is causing. And then imagine your response, instead of empathy, is saying, don't be so hung up on breast cancer. There's also lung cancer. There's also brain cancer. There's also these other forms of cancer that we need to be worried about. You see, what listen to us requires is that you hear the person and acknowledge their experience, acknowledge their pain, acknowledge this real, authentic thing that they are feeling and that happened to them, and to be in that place with them. And so that's the first one, is listen to us.
And nothing ever is going to change until you have a friend that you get on the other side of and listen to and hear from. I saw someone the other day said, hey, if you really want to try to help make America better, go follow 5 people on social media that believe different than you and just spend some time thinking about what they're saying. That alone is powerful. Trying to understand, why does a veteran feel so strongly about standing up for the flag? Why does a black football player feel so passionate about kneeling? I think all of us should be responsible to understand why someone feels the way they do. And that's what I think listening to us does, for me at least. The second one is this, a little more difficult than just listening, maybe not. You said that was the most difficult, but believe us.
Yes, believe us. So when someone shares something with you, how many of y'all are married? Raise your hand. All right, men, if your wife says something to you, she says she has a need, it would be in your best interest to believe them in what they're saying. And so in this, when you believe someone, you give credibility to their story. And you share with that person, you tell them, you show them that you value them as a human being, as someone you love, as someone who's a part of your family. So after you listen, once you believe, that's an acknowledgement of this brokenness that exists inside of the other person. And it's really a position of humility on your part.
Have you actually had people that didn't believe you?
I think, yeah, all the time. I remember when I was younger, one of my best friends, I had 2 best friends, both of them were white, and I remember her father was racist. So she can come to my house, but the moment I went to her house, I couldn't go in. And I remember sharing that with my other best friend, which we were all 3 best friends. I ended up sharing that with my other best friend, like, yeah, I wasn't able to go in her house. You know, her dad was saying, no, that black kid can't come in, you know, all these different things. And my friend absolutely did not believe me. She thought what I was saying was a lie, and so she asked the girl who has that father, and my friend, she just didn't even know how to respond to her. So yes, my very close best friend was the very first person who did not believe what I was saying, that I wasn't invited because of the color of my skin. So.
The third one is care for us, that after you've heard, after you've believed, then to care. What does that mean to you? Why is that so important?
Yeah, care is the next level. You know, if someone tells you something and they're hurt and they're broken, you extend empathy to them. You extend your heart to them. You involve yourself in their situation. So a part of what the gospel calls us to do as Christians is to carry each other's burdens. And so in that, once you listen, once you believe, care. Give yourself over to that situation. Place yourself in their shoes. How would you feel? And help carry that burden with them. That's what it means to care.
The fourth one I love is befriend us, which goes beyond just an acquaintance, clearly, but it's actually building a relationship. What does that do? What does a relationship do?
Yeah, so when you befriend someone, again, this is not just a token friend like South Park. You're just having a token black friend. But this is actually getting involved in living life with that person. Going to that person's house, going to that person's church, investing in that person's community. When you befriend someone, you welcome them into the fold. And you also give yourself into their way of living, into their lifestyle. And you invest in them in a very intimate, personal way. So when you befriend someone, that's like if Clay asked me if we can go eat. I'm going to say, yes, let's go to KFC. Let's get some popcorn, chicken or something like that. Let's do it. Like you make that relationship personal and intentional when you befriend someone.
One of the first things that Pastor Lee said as I was getting to know him was his experience with white pastors is white pastors typically, he said any white pastor that I've had a relationship with, he's like, this is just my experience, is they'll be friends, but it's always on their term. Come to my church, come over to my place. And so for me, I just decided, look, if we're ever meeting, we're doing it at Eagle's Nest because I'm coming to your place, I'm coming to your building because I want to be in your world, because I understand that for most of your life, you've had to acclimate to white culture, which is majority culture. So that was for me, I just thought as soon as he said that, I thought, well, that part, a lot of this is really hard. I can do that. I can come to your house. The other thing that I've really enjoyed is trying to hear someone, trying to believe someone, trying to befriend someone, and then trying to just do what they say. I feel like part of the responsibility white people have is to believe and then just say, what should we do? You tell me what should we do. Because for a long time, we've controlled the agenda, and maybe the most loving thing we can do, which is what we've tried to do here. I've said this to Amira Joe on our staff. I said, Amira, you tell us, what do we need to do? And so she's laid out a plan, and we're just following her plan, because I feel like that is what it looks like for me to be a friend to her, is to say, you control the agenda. So the last one, Cameron, is to stand up for us. What does that look like? What's your favorite picture of that, or maybe the most moving part of that to you?
When you read the Gospels and you see what Jesus did in the way that he stood up for us, it required sacrifice. It required a loss. He gave something up in order to invest in us. And so in this instance, when you, as a majority, as a white person, when you decide that I'm going to listen, I'm going to believe, I'm going to care, I'm going to befriend, and when you stand up, that's when you make this a part of your life, a part of your sacrifice as well. And so in the story of Luke 10, when you see the Samaritan taking care of the Jewish man on the street, he made his life a part of his own. He took him to the inn. He paid for his fee to be there. He said any other charge that he adds up while he is here, put it on my tab. So when you stand up for someone, you stand in the gap. And you make sure that if their voice is not being heard, I'm going to do anything I can to make sure mine is heard on their behalf. And that requires sacrifice.
I love that. That's inspiring. And I feel like the thing I love about what Lee has put together is any one of us can do that. We can do that tonight. I mean, you can do that before you leave here. You can embrace someone, listen to someone, believe someone, befriend someone, stand up for someone, even on a night like tonight. So I just love that because it's so action-oriented. So thank you for bringing that Thanks for making that so easy for us. I want to open it up to a Q&A. I don't have a clock or anything, so I don't know what. We have about 10 minutes. We do have 10 minutes? We're going to be a little over if we go 10 minutes. Okay. Well, let's just take a couple of the questions. They mentioned they were going to put the questions up on the screen. There they are. Okay, fantastic. Y'all don't even have to turn around. I'll just read it to you. Either one of you want to handle this question. Here it is right here. What do you do when your white counterparts don't stand up for you?
What I would say is, depending on the relational equity that we've built or relationship we have, I believe that holds conversation for sure. Since we've lived here in Georgia, there's a few people that we've talked to. I have like a mentor, Lisa. She's probably somewhere in here. I remember my husband and I going to see Get Out. I don't know if any of you saw that movie, Get Out. But it was my husband and I, we went to see that movie, saw it, and then we hurried up and wanted to get out of the movie theater because it was just filled with predominantly white people. But we had a small group, and all of our small group were white people. So we were like, do we talk about this? Can we talk about this? Can we bring this up? But during that time, it was also a lot of racial tensions going on, racial divides. People that look like us, walk like us, talk like us was being killed for absolutely no reason. So Marquise and I would go into small group feeling like defeated. And so I remember us going into small group and having a conversation with them, and we just kind of laid it out. And yes, it was crickets. Yes, it was quiet in there. But it was we need to have that healthy conversation, and they were super receptive, and they ended up getting on. I remember one of our friends got on social media, and she was talking about Black Lives Matter versus White Lives Matter versus All Lives Matter versus Blue Lives Matter, and she like stuck up for Black Lives Matter, and she got a lot of backlash from a lot of her friends, a lot of her family, as to why she would even stand up for that hashtag. And so, but she combated it with grace and love, and it just was awesome to see. And so I think conversations will have to be, be had.
I love this question just because it's just, sometimes this is hard to ask, or you don't know if you can ask it. So do you prefer the term Black or African American?
Personally, I prefer the term beautiful chocolate. So if y'all can call me beautiful chocolate from now on, Hershey's Kiss,
Cameron.
something like that. Yeah,
Wow.
Gosh, that is so good.
No, but honestly, this changes every generation. So don't get so hung up on the terminology. Really just depends on your personal relationship with that person. If that person said that they would prefer to be called Black, they would prefer to be called African American, I highly suggest you don't call them colored. But if you said that you want to call them that, and they asked and they said this is okay, then that's fine. But it really depends on the relationship you have with the person.
That's great. This is a fantastic question. Why are things like Black History Month, BET, or the Mobos, which I hate, but I do not know the Music of Black Origin Awards, is that stunning that I do not know what the Mobos are? No. Okay, I've never heard that, but that's fantastic. Why are those things not racist?
Yes. So it's interesting because Lecrae actually answered this on this new album. If y'all haven't listened to All Things Are Possible, All Things Work Together. It's an amazing album. You need to listen to it. But he talks about this a little bit. One of the things people also ask is, why are there HBCUs? Isn't that inherently racist? Well, not if you're aware of history. Well, one of the reasons that we have things like Black History Month, one of the reasons that we have things like BET, because Black people were never allowed to work in mainstream media. You weren't allowed to get in mainstream education. We were not allowed to be part of these mostly white events. So the reason that Black History Month had to happen was because we were being so neglected in public education. For example, raise your hand if you ever heard of Black Wall Street. Tulsa, Oklahoma, Greenwood, Tulsa, Oklahoma, 1921. That is the largest domestic terrorist attack to ever happen in U.S. soil. 600 to 6,000 African Americans were murdered in one city over an allegation in one night. It was the single most profitable Black community in the entire United States of America in 1921. It was wiped off the face of the earth off of a rumor that a white girl might have been raped. 600 to 6,000 people. Have any of you ever heard of that? A few of you. So why do we need Black History Month? Because you need to know stuff like that. You need to be aware of the racial inequities that have happened in this country. You need to be aware of what happened in 1865, a Reconstruction era after emancipation. You need to be aware that Jim Crow law started in 1865 and did not end until 1965. You need to be aware of that in my family, my sister and I, we are first generation voters in this country given with the inherent right to vote because the Voting Rights Act wasn't passed until 1965. So why do we need a Black History Month? Because 98% of you have no idea that any of these things are actually existing and going on in our world. But we do. So because what we have done, our history, our rhetoric, our language, our culture has never ever been represented in TV correctly or in the history books, those are just some of the small reasons why BET and Black History Month is necessary.
And honestly, that in that same vein is why Black Lives Matter is so important. It's why all lives matter, I would imagine, could be offensive. Is that fair to say? Can you explain that? Why does Black Lives Matter matter? And why should it be a thing?
Well, I think Black Lives Matter simply because for so many years, for decades, we haven't been heard. There's two things that I think every individual, no matter where you lie on the spectrum, what background you come from, is you want to be heard and you want to be loved. But for majority of our life, coming from slavery, just different things that we had to go through as an ethnic group, we haven't been heard. And we feel like we haven't been loved because nothing in our world shows us that. And so I think Black Lives Matter is saying like, hey, we matter too. That's it. Not saying white lives don't matter or all lives don't matter, only Black lives matter. That's not what we're saying. What we're saying is that, hey, we matter too. We want to be heard too. We want to be loved too. We want the same rights as well. And I think like if we can take off, going back to listening to what individuals have to say, listen to understand instead of listening to respond is so huge to us because we'll feel those 5 things that you've talked about, especially the listening part and believing us and befriending us and caring for us and standing up for us. I think that those are so important, and the only way that can happen is if we're heard. The only way that can happen is if you're getting into the space of people who look different, walk different, talk different than you. If you only migrate to those that look like you, talk like you, walk like you, what could you possibly be learning? But it's important for us to get comfortable with being uncomfortable with all diversities, everything that our world exists in. We're not just white nation. But I mean, we're Black, we're Asian, we're Hispanic, we're white. And so I think Black Lives Matter just, for me, represents something that, that just saying that, like, we matter too.
That's great. And it was so helpful for me to learn that because the first time I heard it, I thought, well, yeah, all lives matter. So, but again, that's not the point. The point is, I would hate for any friend of mine to feel like their life doesn't matter. And the way they have been treated, it feels like their life doesn't matter. And so out of that feeling of, hey, it kind of seems like that we don't matter, so we have created this Black Lives Matter movement, I think getting on the other side of that, trying to understand that is really, really important. So in light of that, somebody asked a question, which I think is great. Are Black people open to ignorant questions like the ones that I have asked on this interview?
Yes. By the way, you're doing a great job. Yeah. So the thing is, again, this goes back to this whole befriending. If you don't have a substantial relationship with another Black person, then of course, people are going to get offended by your questions. The reason is they don't know you. If you walked into my house and I had never met you before and you said, hey, what kind of soap do you use or whatever, I'm not going to answer that question. I have no idea who you are. I use Swagger by Old Spice, by the way. So when you don't have a personal relationship with someone, then of course they're going to get offended about it. But that's why it's so important for you to come out of your comfort zone, get out of your own way, and to invest in another person that thinks different, looks different, and acts different.
That's great. Let's end with this question because I think it's a fantastic one. This will be the last one. Is it offensive when people intentionally seek to add diversity in the marketplace or in marketing or promotion of their businesses or services or churches for that matter?
Yeah, so again, this is an interesting one. If you're just looking to have a face for the sake of having a face to draw more people, that's a problem. Now, again, we talked about this some in the book study. You see, a lot of white churches, what they do is they actually hire black talent. But where will they put them? Entertainment, sing, dance, rap, MC, or a greeter. But an actual mover and shaker, someone who has influence, someone who makes decisions, someone who actually sets the tone of the community, that's a completely different thing. So if you're not aiming to actually have diversity ingrained in your culture, you're missing the mark. Because what's happening is you're trying to maintain the status quo of this white privilege, and you're saying, I want black people to come and work alongside of that without challenging the actual system that's in place. And so if you don't have black people in a business, in a church especially, that are a part of changing the rhetoric and the culture of the community, not only are you doing a disservice to the people that are there, you're doing a disservice to this gospel that we call to follow through this Jewish man who was dark in skin tone in first century Galilee. So again, if we are not intentional about adding diversity of thought, race, and everything else into actual positions of power, then it's just a show.
Cameron, that's fantastic. Crystal, I'm going to ask you to pray for us to close tonight. Let me just say one thing. First of all, thank you to both of you. Cameron, thank you for your passion. Thank you for your intellect. Thank you for how excellent you are at talking about such a delicate issue. Crystal, thank you for your beautiful hair, first of all, which is phenomenal tonight. But thank you for being you, and thank you for bringing yourself to this conversation. One of the things that I have learned, probably the best thing that I have learned about diversity is at the heart of God, because he is the creator of diversity. And there is not an obligation to diversity, but there's a beauty in diversity. And I want this community to be known as one of the most diverse communities in this city, in this community, because of how beautiful diversity is. I've learned this in marriage. I'm married to a woman who does not think like me and thinks like a lot of women think. And I have learned so much about life, seeing life through her eyes, that I never would have seen if I married someone exactly like myself, which too often I wish everyone was just like me, just like we all do. But there's something beautiful about having a lot of different perspectives on life. There's something beautiful about having a lot of different cultures and backgrounds, and this is the way I see things. Oh, really, this is how I see it, and this was my background. Well, this was my background. There's beauty in learning about that, and it colors life in the most beautiful way. And so I really believe that if you haven't gotten on board with diversity, or you feel like it's an obligation even, then maybe the best thing that could happen tonight is for any one of us to open up to the beauty of diversity. Because diversity is not our idea, and it's not an obligation that we have. It is God's idea, and it's an opportunity that's in front of us to be able to have a more beautiful life. So I'm grateful for the different views, the different thoughts, the background. I'm grateful for each one of you as human beings for what you bring, so thank you. And in light of that, Crystal, I'd love for you to just pray us out tonight and pray for this community, that God would allow us to become even more beautiful in diversity.
Absolutely. If everyone would bow their heads. Dad, I just want to come to you tonight just thanking you so much for this opportunity. Thank you for Clay and Cameron and everyone that's in attendance on tonight. Father God, I ask that you just continue to pierce our hearts, Lord God, to break for what your heart breaks for, Lord God, that we'll be able to see each other as our brothers and sisters and be able to stand up for injustice all over our world, Lord God. I pray for this community. I ask that we'll just continue to be able to have real conversations, that we'll continue to be able to build relational equity with individuals that look, talk, and walk different than us, that we will listen attentively to those who are speaking, Lord God, to care for what they care for, God. And so I just ask that you just continue to do a new thing within us. This is something only you can do. And so I just ask that you regulate our minds. You continue to do open heart surgeries on our heart, Lord God, that we'll be able to move the way that you've called us to move, and that we'll be able to speak in the way that you've called us to speak, and that we'll be able to live in the way that you've called us to live. And so I just thank you for this time. I ask and I pray that no one has the spirit the feeling of like guilt or shame, Lord God, but the feeling of that they've learned something new, Lord God, that they can take into their relationships in their workplace, at their schools, at their churches, Lord God, that they will be able to move into spaces and places that look different than they do and look different than we do. Let me add myself into that. And so I just thank you for what you're doing in our lives. I thank you for what you're going to do. And I thank you for what is already being done right now in this place. In Jesus' matchless name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Crystal, thank you. Cameron, thank you. Can we show them a little love? Thank you.